without a break tonight, so she's not going to be here, unfortunately. I actually think tonight's meeting will be on the short side. Okay, so the exam is in the books. If you haven't, you need to make an appointment for test corrections, assuming that you want to take advantage of that. Before we have our appointment, you need to do assignment 8, which is your exam 2 reflection. I did my first test corrections today. It was fun. I'm not tired of it yet, but I'm sure I will be, especially for the people that wait until the last minute. Sophia, speaking of wait until the last minute.
Hi.
For tonight, that's gorgeous stained glass behind you, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the course outline for a minute. All right. Oh, too complicated. Story of my life is having 12 windows open at the same time. All right, and we will share. Okay, so here's our course outline. Here we are in this week, right? Week 12, according to the calendar. So we have 3 weeks left, and I've decided that we're not going to do topic 11. That will give you a little time to get caught up and ready for the final. Okay, so this week we're going to do theory of labor markets. Next week we're going to do pollution and environmental problems, and then the following week we will just review for the final. How does that sound? Does anybody object?
No. No objections. No.
No objections here.
All right. You know, you could take, oh, okay. So what I usually say at this point is, okay, we're done with all the theory in this course. And now what we're going to do for the following 3 weeks is show you how the theory can be used. So each of these things is an application of theory that you've already used. And each of these is actually a subdiscipline in economics. You can take 1 or more courses in labor market economics at Mary Washington. You can take 1 or more courses in pollution and environmental problems. And you can take 1 or more courses in international economics. Okay, so if, say, you are an environmental science major, you know, I'm going to give you a little taste of environmental economics, and hopefully it'll motivate you to take more courses in it. Adam, are you still planning to graduate at the end of the term?
Yes, I should be.
Okay, well then you don't need to listen to that.
Okay.
Okay. I will have a word with Professor Moon and see if I can push you one way or the other. And I haven't decided which way the push will be. So I know we'll have a vote, not in this class, but maybe with Matthew and Harry and Jack. Is it thumbs up or thumbs down?
I really hope that my fellow teammates and foreign students would give me a thumbs up and give me a little bit of help.
I know. You would hope that, wouldn't you?
I would hope that, but...
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Fair enough. So I'll keep my fingers crossed and we'll hope for the best. And hopefully you'll hear about the vote soon.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. So today we're going to start talking about theory of labor markets. This, I think, is relatively straightforward. If you work through the module, you should be able to figure it all out. That said, I wanted to give you kind of a high-level summary of what is in that module. All right, and what is that? Oh, you guys are in my way here. Okay, all right, so we can get rid of the screen. And I will pull my notes up. All right. So, simple but really important question. Mac, you made it. Mac, you made it just in time for the question.
Oh,
Okay, Mac. Why would an employer hire you?
because
Why would an employer hire anybody?
they're valuable.
They, the employer?
No, the employee. They're
What do you-
valuable in some way.
So what way is that?
They can make
What do you
the
bring to
employer
them?
money.
Say that again.
They can make the employer money.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Employers hire people because they need those people, those workers' productivity. Okay, because productivity turns into dollars, and that's what it's all about. Okay, so that's really all you need to know in order to understand what I'm about to tell you, which is about the demand for labor. Okay. First rule of labor markets. If a firm wants to maximize their profits, and we assume they do, they will never pay more for a worker than the value of his or her marginal productivity to the firm. Let me repeat that one more time. If a firm wants to maximize profits, it will never pay more for a worker than the value of his or her marginal productivity to the firm. Okay, here's an example, very simple one.
All right,
Okay.
one more time. Can I get the second half of that? Sorry.
Okay. If a firm wants to maximize profits, it will never pay more than the value of the worker's marginal productivity to the firm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, suppose a worker can produce 2 widgets an hour, and each widget can be sold by the firm for $4 each. How much is the worker worth to the firm? If a worker can produce 2 widgets an hour and each widget can be sold for $4 each, how much is the worker worth to the firm? How much are they generating for the firm?
$8.
They're generating $8. So the firm will never pay more than $8 for that worker, because otherwise they would be losing profit. Now, ideally, the firm will pay less than $8, right? But the first rule says they won't pay more. Okay. Now, we can formalize this and say that the demand for labor is the marginal product of labor times the value of that output to the firm. In other words, the demand for labor, the value of labor, is the marginal product of each worker times the price of the product that the firm sells. So in this case, the marginal product we said was 2 and the price was 4. And so the most a firm will pay is 2 times 4 is $8. Now, we know, well, let me ask you, what happens to the marginal product of labor as a firm hires more and more workers?
You kind of froze a minute. Can you repeat
Okay,
that?
sure. So as a firm hires more workers, what happens to the marginal product of each additional worker?
In the short run or the long run?
Short run.
It's going to go up.
The marginal
Why?
product.
Adam?
I was agreeing. I was saying the marginal product of labor will go up
Why?
because there's more people. They'll be able to make more.
Ah,
But,
okay.
but it'll cost the company more because they have to pay them.
Okay, we're not talking about the cost yet. We're just looking at the marginal physical product, how many widgets they can produce.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember, there's this thing called diminishing marginal productivity, which says holding capital constant, as you hire more workers, each additional worker produces less than the ones that came before. So if you were to graph the marginal product of labor, it is a downward sloping line. Now, if we take that downward sloping line and we multiply the line by the price of the firm's product, we get literally a downward sloping demand curve for the firm's labor. So labor demand is just like a demand curve. It's downward sloping. Now, how does an employer decide how many workers it makes sense to hire?
Can you say that again?
How does the firm decide how many workers to hire? How many workers it makes sense to hire? It's really easy. They compare the dollars that the dollars that the worker will bring in through their productivity with what they have to pay in terms of a wage, right? So as long as the value of the marginal product of a worker is greater than the wage rate, then that worker is going to make money for the firm and they'll get a job. Okay, now we're assuming that the firm can hire as many workers as it wants to, assuming that it pays the going market wage rate. Okay, so the market wage is horizontal and the demand for labor is downward sloping. And so where those two curves intersect, that's going to tell you the quantity of jobs that the firm will hire for.
What are the two things intersecting?
The horizontal wage rate and the downward sloping demand for labor, okay? The demand for labor says at a given wage rate, here's how many workers we will hire, okay? So the firm doesn't choose the wage, they pay whatever the going wage rate is, and then they decide as long as a worker is worth more than that going wage rate, we will hire them. Okay, if the wage goes down, what would happen to the number of jobs? Mac?
They decrease.
Yeah, no, it would increase. At a lower wage rate,
Oh, yeah.
extra workers would be affordable to the firm. Okay, okay. Now, we're assuming that the firm can hire as many workers as it wants to at the going market wage rate. In other words, we're assuming that the labor market is competitive.
You froze again.
Okay, we're assuming that the labor market is competitive. Okay, so there is a demand for labor in the market. There's a supply of labor in the market. And where the two curves intersect, that's going to be the going market wage rate. Where does the market demand for labor come from? How do we figure it out? How do we figure out the market demand for pizza? Do you remember that? For pizza, we add up every consumer's demand for pizza and we get the market demand for pizza. With labor, it works the same way. We would add up demand for labor for every firm trying to hire a certain kind of job, like entry-level jobs doing contracting or something like that, right? So you would look at all the contractors and you would simply add up all their demands for labor and you get the demand for labor for contracting jobs. Okay, so again, this is just the same as what we did with basic supply and demand. The supply of labor is made up of all the people who have the skills in order to do that job. And we can reasonably assume that the higher the job pays, the more people will decide, hey, I'm gonna see if I can get a job in that industry. Okay. I've taken enough computer classes that I can do programming, but I'm not a programmer. I'm an economist. But if they started paying more money, then maybe I would get rid of my day job as a teacher and go do programming. What would make me do that is an increase in the wage rate. So just like every other supply curve, as the wage goes up, the quantity supplied is going to increase also. It's an upward sloping supply of labor with a downward sloping demand for labor. Where they cross, that's the going wage rate. And that's the wage that individual employers offer to people, because that's what everyone else is paying. All right.
So would it be true for the inverse that if the wage goes down, the demand for labor goes down as well?
No, because as the wage goes down, workers are cheaper. Employers will want to hire more of them.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, though, that you're not going to get me to work for you if you offer less money, right? So the supply of labor falls while the demand for labor rises. Okay. Any questions so far? All right, good. Now, oh my gosh, who's that? That's the ceiling we're looking at, right? Well, we have a mystery person. Who's the mystery person? Could it be Morgan? Hey, Morgan. I like your costume. All right, back to work then. Okay, so the story that I've told you so far makes the assumption that labor markets are, if not perfectly competitive, then pretty close to perfectly competitive, okay? It turns out that there are a fair number of labor markets that are very competitive, but there are also labor markets that are not, okay? So the imperfections in the competition can occur on the demand side of the market, but also the supply side of the market. The supply side is easier to understand. Think about what unions do. What a union does, well, let me ask you. Let's see. Who's feeling lucky? Lindsay. Hey, Lindsay.
Hi.
What's a union? How does it work?
Honestly, I have no idea what a union is.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Can somebody take Lindsay off the hook here? Carolyn, how about you? Carolyn?
I don't really know either, but isn't it like something with like they like protect the workers that are like within them?
Yes. Okay.
They have them for like different like jobs.
Yeah. What a union does is it negotiates salaries and working conditions on behalf of all the workers working together collectively. Okay. Typically, one worker has very little power or influence over their employer, but all of the workers together have power. Okay, so what a union does in the extreme case is it acts like a monopoly in the supply of labor. The union goes to the business and says, if you want anyone to work for you, you have to talk to us and you have to negotiate with us. Okay, so the advantage of a union is it typically ends up with higher wages and better working conditions because the firm doesn't have as much choice in the matter at that point. Okay, does that make sense to you? Kevin, are you nodding? Hopefully. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when there is imperfect competition on the demand side, that is more complicated because almost nobody who hasn't studied microeconomics has ever heard of monopsony. Monopsony means there's only a single employer in the labor market. Okay, so if you want to work, your only option is to work for the monopsony, which means the monopsony has a great deal of power. They can lowball you in terms of wages and working conditions, and you have little option. I mean, your option is either work at a lower salary or don't work at all. Okay, so for example, suppose we were looking at, suppose you're looking for a job and it has to be within the city limits of Fredericksburg. And you are a cardiac intensive care nurse. How many possible employers are there in Fredericksburg? Tiger? Tiger's pretending that she's not there. Pam, can you help us out here?
That would be one.
That would be one, Mary Washington Hospital. If you want to work as a cardiac intensive care nurse, you have to work for them. Okay, so while a true monopsony situation is relatively rare, there is, what is more common is what I call oligopsony, where there are only a small number of employers for the kinds of jobs that you're looking for. So just as oligopoly has market power, though not as much as a monopoly does, oligopsony has market power, though not as much as a monopsony would. What that means is that oligopsonies can get their workers, but pay them less than they would have to pay if there were competition for the workers. Okay, so it's interesting to look at different labor markets to see, is there power on the supply side, is there power on the demand side, and how does that affect outcomes in the labor market, outcomes in terms of wages paid and in terms of jobs available and things like that. Okay, the most interesting case is something called bilateral monopoly. Bilateral monopoly is what happens when you have a monopsony, a single employer, dealing with a union. So the workers have power on the supply side and the employer has power on the demand side. What do you think the outcome depends on in that situation? Or let me put it this way, will wages be higher than the competitive wage, or will they be lower than the competitive wage? I'll just say there is no obvious clear answer to that question. In the real world, it depends on whose market power is greater. It depends on who has better negotiating skill. All right. Any questions? if you work through the module, it will take you through all of these cases. And it will give you answers, specific answers for everything except the bilateral monopoly case. There's that has an indeterminate wage. All right, now I've only gotten one module analysis for module 9. You guys have until next week's Hangout to get your module analyses in, so that if there's anything that you're still struggling with, we can talk about it next week. Otherwise, we're going to move on and start talking about environmental problems next week. So anybody have anything they need to ask or say? All right, in that case, we will call it a night, and I will go cook some stir fry. Seems to be my Wednesday night thing.
Okay, this is a Wednesday night thing, Mr. Fry.